All right, hello, friends. It's April 6th, and Zach said he's on his way, but he's running late, and so we've got to go at 7 o'clock, and I figured I'd just go ahead and get started before Zach gets here so we can get into this question. We have an excellent question today from our friend Ray, who writes, "Hello, John. I hope you are well. I'm confused. Are we still to fear God? I am reading 1 John. In 1 John 4:18, it reads about love casting out fear and how there is no fear in love. Prior to that, it reads that God is love. However, I've also read in the Old Testament that we are to fear God. Is this also why Jesus came? To help us rid our fear of God?" Peace and love from Ray. Well, peace and love to you too, and to everyone who will see this. Fear of God is a tough one because a lot of us grow up with God as sort of the judgmental father figure on the throne who's waiting to punish anyone who steps out of line. And as we move into a more spiritual understanding of our faith and we try to develop the intimacy with God that we talk about with respect to Christian mysticism, that judgmental father figure sort of melts away and we have an experience of God as love and as the Son who comes to save us without judgment, and the Spirit who fills us and empowers us and heals what's broken in us and helps us to become our true selves. And so there's sort of a disconnect between our idea of God once we start to grow spiritually and the idea of God that we had maybe when we were children, that God is to be feared primarily in sort of a, man, I hope God doesn't catch me messing up kind of way. Now, I've got a couple ways to talk about the fear of God that I use with students and people who ask me this question. And I'm actually really interested to see what Zach will say because I know that this is something that he's probably thought a lot about. But what I'd like to do is share some of St. Maximus the Confessor's teachings on the fear of God, because this is a mysticism channel, and he had some very pointed things to say about how the fear of God doesn't go away, but how it does mature in our souls as we walk the path of spiritual growth. So before we jump into that, our friend the Whimsy and the Wreckage writes, "I've literally been praying on rediscovering my reverence and holy fear of God, and that he'd crush my fear of man." And Kira Taylor says, "Oh yeah, I love this question. Definitely been something I've thought a lot about over my life." Right on. And I'm not surprised because the people who I've encountered through our YouTube channel are people who think about God in ways that maybe aren't typical for, I don't know, I guess like your standard expression of the Christian faith. But most of you are people who take God's reality and our spiritual relationship with him very seriously. And we call that faith. And Maximus the Confessor says that if you have faith, fear of God is a natural offshoot of your faith. And so if you believe in God and you believe that he's with you, a healthy fear of God is part of that spiritual experience. But let's go ahead and read what he said. Yeah, the Whimsy and the Wreckage says, God out of the religious bias box. Definitely. So I'm going to read you guys some things from St. Maximus the Confessor and his classic mystical text, which is called 400 Texts on Love. And my phone is very low on battery, and so if we lose this here at some point, I apologize. Okay. So this is the First Century on Love, paragraph 81. And St. Maximus writes, fear of God is of two kinds. The first is generated in us by the threat of punishment. It is through such fear that we develop in due order self-control, patience, hope in God, and dispassion. And it is from dispassion that love comes. The second kind of fear is linked with love and constantly produces reverence in the soul, so that it does not grow indifferent to God because of the intimate communion of its love. The first kind of fear is expelled by perfect love when the soul has acquired this and is no longer afraid of punishment. And he references the verse that Ray asked about, 1 John 4:18, which is that perfect love drives out fear. The second kind of fear, as we have already said, is always found united with perfect love. The first kind of fear is referred to in the following two verses. Out of fear of the Lord, men shun evil. That's Proverbs 16:6. And fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Psalm 111:10. The second kind of love is mentioned in the following verses. Fear of the Lord is pure and endures forever. And those who fear the Lord will not want for anything. That's in Psalm 34:10. So in kind of Maximus's understanding, you have two forms of the fear of God. There's a mature version of it and an immature version of it. The immature version of it is what we already talked about, sort of the religious bias box, where God is used usually by people who are older than us as a threat in order to keep us in line. And so there's a certain standard of behavior. That standard is said to derive from God's expectations for us and his rules. And if we break those rules and we step out of line, then the punishment for breaking those rules comes from God. And in his letters, Paul seems to think that that sort of fear of punishment from God has a very real use. Because while we do overblow a lot of the moralism in religious circles, there are, especially when you're immature, there are rules that are good to follow. And Paul kind of talks about the law as it was presented to the Israelites as what was needed as a caretaker to keep them in line before they really understood who God was and who God wanted them to be. The immature fear of God came from a very early understanding of who God was and an incomplete understanding at that. Now, that grows in Paul's thinking to reverence and respect for God because he is great, because he is powerful, because he is holy, because he is God. But it's also mixed with our love and our experience of intimacy with God that we encounter through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. And Maximus seems to say the same thing. He seems to say that there's a healthy fear of God that is good for you when you're young and stupid, and when you don't know any better than to make all the mistakes that we always make when we're young and stupid. Hey, Zach. Good. I'm right in the middle of a point. I'm going to finish explaining, and then I got some questions for you.
Sure.
Okay. You're looking cool.
Thank you, sir.
There's a fear of God that's healthy when we're young and stupid, and that goes along with sort of just the discipline that we need when we're young and when we don't know how to make good decisions for ourselves and we don't really understand how things work. When we don't understand that the things that God tells us not to do, he tells us not to do them, not so that we can't have fun, but for our own good. And the fear of God, according to Paul and according to St. Maximus, at that early immature stage, keeps us from making mistakes that harm us long term. So even that sort of unhealthy, immature fear of God has its place at a certain time in our spiritual development to keep us from doing things that will cause us long-term harm and will protect our well-being as souls as we grow. But if we stay there, then we'll never really know God because we'll never develop intimacy with God. And the shame and the fear and the guilt and just sort of the idea that we're unworthy of God, that sort of immature fear can keep us in a place where we don't reach out for God in love and intimacy, and where we continue to withdraw from him farther and farther while still calling on his name. And I've seen that in a lot of older folks too, who never actually have that moment where their relationship with God clicks for them and they understand that this fearsome, holy, all-powerful creator of the universe does love them as an individual and is concerned for their well-being and wants them to respond to what he's doing in their lives through the Holy Spirit in a way that's personal and intimate. Fear of God has a place there. And what Maximus said is, once we start to develop our intimacy with God, there's a danger that we might become too familiar with him and not show him the proper respect for his holiness that he deserves as a holy and powerful God. That's dangerous, not because God is vindictive and he demands that we revere his name. It's dangerous because if we don't understand who God really is, then we will lose all fear of him, and we will turn into people who don't actually know him at all. So like the healthy fear of God, the reverence for God's name, the reverence for his power and his holiness and who God is perfectly natural and in fact appropriate when we have a proper understanding of who God is. But if we stay in that immature fear of God, we can stay separate from God and never come to know him intimately. And if we completely deny that God is to be reverenced or feared, that shows that we're missing something when it comes to our understanding of who God is, and we don't actually know him completely either. There's, I think, a link between knowing God truly and fearing God well. And those are two things that have to grow up together. And if they don't grow up together, then we're missing part of the equation. I wanted to read you guys one more thing about what Maximus says about the fear of God. Just a second. How was your day, Zach?
It's good. It's good. All over the place. I got to work out today.
Ooh. Running around, chasing down children?
I'm going to be very careful with my words here.
For their well-being and protection?
For their well-being and protection. Discipline.
Got it. Okay. This is from another one of St. Maximus's writings, also from the first, from the 400 texts on love, just in a different place. He says, love is a holy state of the soul, disposing it to value knowledge of God above all created things. We cannot attain lasting possession of such love while we are still attached to anything worldly. Dispassion engenders love. Hope in God gives us dispassion. And patience and forbearance give us hope in God. These in turn are the product of complete self-control, which itself springs from fear of God. And fear of God is the result of faith in God. So let's run that backwards. If we have true faith in God, then we fear God. If we fear God, then we practice self-control. If we practice self-control, then we receive hope in God. Our hope in God helps us to be long-suffering and patient. Long-suffering and patience gives us the healthy detachment that we need to take life as it comes. And when we can take life as it comes, having built that detachment on all the layers that come before, then we can find our way to the love of God. So the reason I just bring that text out is because Maximus saw fear of God as a starting place. Literally what the psalmist and the writer of Proverbs says as the beginning of wisdom. But from the fear of God, we build and we grow toward a healthy relationship of intimacy with God. And the fear never goes away, just like the self-control never goes away, even when we've sort of mastered our relationship to our appetites and our instincts. We still have to practice self-control, just like we still fear God even as we learn to love him. But as we grow spiritually, All of these other qualities of spirit are given to us by the Holy Spirit. And the apex of all of it is our love and intimacy with God. The fear of God is healthy and it's transformed and it's still there. But the purpose of fearing God is so that we can know him as he really is and then love him well in the kind of relationship that he invites us into with him. So perfect love casts out fear. Maximus interprets that as perfect love casts out the immature kind of fear that makes us kind of hide things from our parents or avoid discipline. But fear of God can actually lead us toward a more perfect love of God and toward deeper intimacy with him, because fear of God is right thinking about who God is, his power and his holiness. And that's required. Deep knowledge of someone is required to know them well. And deep knowledge of God leads us more and more into the idea, into the truth about who God is. And those ideas kind of, they're fearful. Because if God really is from age to age, if God really is all powerful, if God really did call life from nothing and is working history toward its end, if God really did defeat Satan on the cross, if God really is communicating to me in the depths of my soul and transforming me into who he created me to be, if he knows my lying down and my getting up, the thoughts and meditations of my heart, if he's that intimately involved in my life and also in control of natural processes and the history of the world, then that is someone to respect. That is someone to reverence. And dare I say, that is someone to fear. But what he invites us into is a relationship of fear and reverence with perfect love that transforms that experience, puts it in its proper place. Let's see what Kira says. She says, when I was a kid, I had such a hard time with fear God because my understanding of fear was linked with being scared and afraid. I don't want to be scared of my Creator who loves me and cares for me. My young mind felt cognitive dissonance at the idea of trusting and being faithful to someone I was afraid of. For kid me, being scared of something felt like the opposite of trusting it. Yeah, when you're a kid, the things you're scared of, you avoid them, right? And that's why we're having a hard time reconciling the idea of fearing God and experiencing intimacy and love with God, because we tend to pull away from what we fear. So going forward toward God and opening our souls to him in intimacy and fearing him at the same time, they just don't seem to fit together. So that was what the question was about, Zach, and I wanted to know what you thought. What are your thoughts on the fear of God?
Well, I would say that you should be very afraid of him. Very, very afraid.
Afraid?
Just kidding. No. But yes and no. I think fear of the Lord is... Oh, that is a tough one. Kind of pertains to what Jesus said about in Matthew when he says, fear the one who has the power to not only kill you, but cast your body into hell, right? So I think of that, but ultimately I don't think that's like, I guess the core of it, like that's a part of it, but it doesn't make up the whole. I guess.
That's not the only statement in Christian thinking on what it means to fear the Lord.
Right.
You'd be terrified that he's going to throw you into hell. Right?
Yeah.
But that is, I think, the way that the fear of the Lord is probably presented.
Oh, yeah.
To a lot of people. Yeah.
I think for me, it's kind of hard to see it in a different light as well, just because coming from a Catholic background, I mean, just having that drilled through my head day and night, not knowing whether or not God was mad at me for so-and-so, and it's hard.
Yeah. Would you say that your early experience of God was probably defined mostly by fear?
Yes and no. I would say when I would go to like maybe the Catholic Church a little bit, or a lot of it came from that. There's some people who are very loving, but I didn't really pick up on it,
Yeah.
because it was very, we took it as like holy, sacred kind of thing, like where you don't talk. It's like a library. You
Sure.
just don't talk, no interaction kind of thing. And, that's just the Catholic Church I went to. Maybe there's some Catholic churches where you guys mingle. I don't know, but that was my experience. Now, outside of the church, I felt like I had experiences with God that weren't so much be fearful of him in the way that, you're going to go to hell, but more so fearful in the fact that, wait, that brings me to a different question. What does it mean that we're fearfully made? You are fearfully and wonderfully made. This has been in my mind.
I have a really messed up interpretation of that verse.
Really?
Okay, so what did David do for most of his life?
He was on the run.
And he also did what? What was his job?
Well, he was a warrior.
He was a mercenary, right?
Yeah.
So how many people do you think David cut open?
Thousands.
Maybe not thousands, but a pretty high number. More than me and more than you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I've hunted, right? Take apart an animal. You see the way that all their organs are connected. And even when I know what I'm looking at from like anatomy class, you just kind of look at it and you go, wow, there's a lot going on here. It's intricate, it's fragile, but it's also incredibly powerful. There's something sacred and something to reverence about the way that creatures are built. And I think that's what David was referring to. All our systems work together. One little change can throw off the whole thing.
Yeah, I didn't mean to deviate from the topic.
No,
but,
it's okay.
I just thought since we're talking about fear of the Lord, that's something I don't know. I just couldn't come up with my own interpretation for that.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot in the Psalms from David's experience where he talks about not just physical forms of creatures, but also the weather and the land and the cycle of the seasons. And all those things lead him to praise God, but also to fear God, because those are all things that are outside of our control. Right? Think of it like this. So let's say you had a pet tiger, right? And let's say that you raised that tiger from when it was a little kitten and you just loved it, right? When it was a little kitten. And then it grows up and it hits adult age and you've got it in its cage and you still love that tiger, but you also need to fear it and show it the proper respect or it will bite your arm off, right? Lots of people that get pet tigers get maimed by pet tigers because they get too familiar with it and they lose their healthy respect. And if that's true about something, like a tiger is a powerful, beautiful animal, but it's not God. It's a creature like you or me. And so if that's true about something as much like us as a tiger is, then how much more reverence and awe and respect does God deserve? The one who made the tiger, the one who did build us fearfully and wonderfully, the one who does cycle through the seasons and give life and breath to everything.
And who died, but somehow managed to revive himself.
Yeah, when he tells John in Revelation, I was not, I am again.
The words that come from the one that a double-edged sword protrudes from his mouth.
Yeah.
Robe dipped in blood.
Right.
Yeah. The whole 9 yards.
Yeah. Right. Breezy's here. Breezy says that she loves the connection of reverence to fear of God. The awe that we have leads us to seeking wisdom and acting in obedience out of love and being inspired by who he is. Yeah, and so I that's that second level of fear of God, where the threat of punishment isn't the primary motivator anymore. It's our intimacy with God and our knowledge of God has led us to fear and revere God in a way that's appropriate to who God is. That's mature fear of the Lord. Immature fear of the Lord is, oh man, I hope God doesn't catch me messing up because he's going to throw a lightning bolt at me. And we all know lots of people who are even old and have lived their whole lives in a religious context who never grow out of that first fear of the Lord, and they teach it to other people. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Here it says, my grandma helped explain fear to me in the sense of reverence and respect, which helped me a bit to accept it. But it was still something I turned around a lot in my mind growing up. I think I may have made a similar comment before, but for me, what helped me finally make sense of it was to think of the fear of God in contrast to everything else we could be afraid of. Oh, Carmen's here. Hi, Carmen. Yeah, so like there's also that angle on it in scripture when Jesus says, fear the one who can throw you into hell. He's not saying that just sort of on its own. He didn't stand up and say, all right, guys, I've got a message for you today. Fear the one who can throw you into hell and split your soul from your body.
Well, yeah, but
what's the first part of that verse?
He was also talking about don't fear those who can kill your body.
Right. Don't fear those who can kill your body.
Because after that, they can do no more.
Yeah.
Fear the one who can do both that and cast your, I guess, soul, body, spirit, everything into hell. Yeah. Meaning that he is the greater one over human beings.
Right. Which means that you don't have to fear human beings anymore.
Right.
And that's in Isaiah and in Ezekiel when they were facing invading armies. The prophet said, do not fear man whose breath is in his nostrils, but fear God who gives breath of life to all creatures, right? So that's a fancy way of saying if you plug somebody's nose for too long, they'll die, right? And so why are you so afraid of somebody who
will die
just by plugging their nose, or, you know, you can drown in half a cup of water. You can get a virus, or a mosquito can bite you, or a rock can fall on your head, and that's it, right?
Yeah, but hold on a sec, because let's be honest, Sean. If me and you were like David, right, which I know we're not, but we're warriors, and we're warriors on the battlefield, and we're given armor, we're given a sword, we're given a shield, and we go out to the front lines to fight, I would be terrified. I mean, nowadays, they give you a gun. I could be all the way over there at those trees over there and shoot you from here and you wouldn't even see it coming. But this was like up close and personal. Like I had to look you in the eye as I killed you. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that God is wrong here, or what the word's saying is wrong. I'm just saying,
you better not be.
No.
He's gonna be mad.
He's gonna.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
He's gonna strike me dead. Oh no, I shouldn't say that.
Right.
No, you see, fear of the Lord. That was not fear of the Lord. Okay, I caught myself. There you go. But anywho, yeah. So I think that's another major reason why it says that too, because that's probably something that a lot of men were like fearful of, like just going out there and not knowing if, I guess you can rely on your skills to even get you back home, you know?
Sure. So there are enemies, there are accidents, there are people out there who do violence. And then there are also other things to fear, like the future, the unknown, right? We've all been there. And what Kira's saying is, she says, as a Christian, I don't have to be afraid of the things that the world fears. I just have to fear God. And when I do, I don't have to worry about fearing anything else. And so that's another way where, just very practically speaking, the fear of the Lord can be a very healthy thing. Because, and that thinking, if you study the martyrs going back to the earliest days of the church, they had to look death in the face and say, I fear Christ, whose name I worship, more than I fear you, who's going to burn me at the stake or feed me to the lions. Right? And so that was a source of strength, and also from independence, so they could stare people like the Roman Empire right in the face and say, I do not fear you the way that everybody else fears you. You can do whatever you want to my body, but my soul will transcend.
And that requires a new birth, though. What Jesus talks about, born again of the Spirit, because honestly, John, Bartholomew, a lot of people don't know about Bartholomew, but that's the disciple you were talking about last time when you came to the club. They filleted him, they skinned him alive, And then I think they had to decapitate him afterwards because I guess he didn't die or whatever. But that was the one who literally threw his skin over his back and like just walked. Like I don't even know, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And so you might say, like, just from our side of things, being nailed to a cross or having your skin removed or being forced to walk to death, or what happened to Maximus where they
cut out his tongue,
cut off his hand and threw him in the dungeon.
Yeah.
That all looks pretty horrible. But what all those guys had in common, including Christ, was that they didn't bend the knee to the world.
And that's something that's really hard to do today.
Yeah. So the world, the empire, the state, the powers that be, they did everything they could. We've talked about what crucifixion means before, right? You know, like they're showing you naked and vulnerable and beaten, and then once you die, like decomposing to your entire community, saying like, we've completely humiliated you. And Jesus telling us to pick up our cross and follow him is saying, yeah, we're going to walk right into that and not be afraid.
Yeah, that takes guts. So what do you think of the saying, I'd rather die standing up than die on my knees, or something like that? I know I got that.
That's attributed to a lot of different people through history. One of them who used it was the Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata, who said, it's better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty inspiring quote, and it goes along with this. You can protect yourself in certain situations at a cost to your soul.
What do you mean at a cost to your soul?
If you change who you are and you do what you know is wrong, or you don't do what you know is right because of fear, you may survive, but you'll lose respect for yourself.
Yeah,
and this idea of fearing God has been an ideal that a lot of people throughout history have held on to say, I am not going to let fear rule me. The kind of the proto martyrs that did this were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that got thrown into the furnace by King Nebuchadnezzar because they wouldn't worship the golden image that he set up.
Yeah.
Right? They wouldn't bow down with everybody else. And I really like what they say to the king. They say, our God will rescue us for being faithful to him, but even if he doesn't, we will not bow our knee to the golden image because that is not God. Now, if they sit down with King Nebuchadnezzar and they say, hey, let's negotiate. You know what I mean? What if we bow a little bit where nobody can see so that you don't lose face, but also so that we don't get ridiculed by our other Jewish exiles here in Babylon? And then they work out some deal with the king where they meet halfway, and then those guys just kind of go on with their lives. That comes at the cost of like all of your spiritual power. That comes at the cost of your self-respect. That comes at the cost of your soul. You're letting someone else use intimidation and fear to dominate you. And you may bend and you may survive, but you no longer have that strength and that self-respect that you had when you started. And there are some things that are not, no matter what the price is, they're not worth selling. Which is why Jesus says all the time, rejoice when people say all kinds of evil about you, right? Because they treated the prophets that came before you in the same way. He wants us to be independent. He wants us to know who we are without being subject to every pressure that gets put on us from outside. And one of the main pressures that people use to manipulate us is fear. Fear of violence, fear of dishonor, fear of ridicule. And if you can honestly say, I fear God more than I fear all those things, you won't find yourself running with the madness of the crowd. You'll find yourself thinking for yourself.
I think death is the hardest one for me.
Yeah?
Yeah, because that's pretty much not only all of you, like you literally gave all of yourself, like everything, But who else but Jesus has raised from the dead and said, "Hey guys, heaven's amazing." I mean, you see all those movies with like heaven is for real and all that stuff, but I mean, not to like discredit any of those people, but it's still very cloudy and murky. Like, I don't know if that really happened. How do I know that they're telling the truth? And it doesn't even just come down to that. But like I said, how many of those stories do you even hear?
Yeah. Well, what I would say, Zach, is if we're gonna play the "Who should you fear" game, let's fear the one who conquered death instead of fearing death itself.
No, but that's my point. That's why it's so difficult, because Christ was literally saying, "Look, I'm not even scared of death. I died, yet I live again, and those who die will still live." And that's his promise. That's my hope, right?
Yeah.
I'm hoping that that's real, right? If not, then I guess I'm just fertilizer for the ground. But
that wouldn't be so bad.
No, but kind of sad.
I don't know.
I don't know. That's my huge struggle with it, you know? Like you die for something, but you're not sure. I mean, if you're going to come back from that, you know? And I think that's the ultimate test, is to just trust God, fear God more than life and death itself. Yeah. And that's really hard.
Yeah. Teresa says, David has talked about feeling like he has seen God enact a bit of judgment on earth with people, and this has influenced his own fear of God, going back to the ferocious animal metaphor. So, do you feel like you've ever seen God like avenge?
What do you mean avenge?
Like execute judgment?
I don't know how I would even know. Because remember the time when Herod died and Peter, I think, was the one to say, well, he died because God killed him because he did this. I'm not sure if I can say the same thing, because I don't know if that was an act of God or that just so happened to be them in the wrong time, wrong place. And it just so happened that the stone or nail came loose, it fell on them, and they died. I don't know I don't know if, you know. What about you?
It's a little different because of my line of work.
What is he? Is it pastor?
Yeah. You see people set a course in their lives. You might even warn them against the course that they're on. And you see people treat not just the idea of God, but like everything that we believe or hold dear. You see them treat it lightly, like it doesn't matter. And then you can see those people later, not always, but their lives are in ruins. And you know that it's discipline from God, maybe taking things away in order to get them back on the right track. But you also know that a lot of the disaster that they threw themselves into could have been avoided if they would have feared God a little bit more simply from the beginning.
Well, with that being said, a question for our listeners, not that I don't disagree, but what would you say to someone who says, well, wait a second, John, how is that judgment from God when that was the own person's actions that got them there in the first place?
Because the judgment of God is leaving us to our own devices. That's a conversation for another time.
Yeah,
but
I know.
The about the worst thing God can do sometimes is give us our own way.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
And I thought you meant judgment in the sense that he literally, I don't know, does something so profound to someone that you're like, oh wow, like I never saw that coming. Like, Wow, that must be God. Like they legitimately got hit by a meteor or something, like something ridiculous.
Yeah, I remember this from a couple weeks ago when we were talking about how they brought breakfast over after you guys prayed. You sometimes need like something so out of the ordinary, so that there's no to remove like any doubt that it came from the Lord, right?
Oh, that's true. You see, that's what I don't get myself. That time I credited the tacos with God, yet here I am talking about how I don't even know if it's judgment from God.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just trying to take a more cautious approach, you know? I don't want to...
No, and there's nothing more annoying than somebody who goes around saying that everything bad that happens in anybody's life is because God is judging them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what we're saying at all.
Yeah, and you remember I got into an argument, and sadly, yes, it was an argument with the girls over at Kairos about whether or not a flat tire or, hitting a nail was of Satan, or if you just simply ran over a nail and it had nothing to do with Satan at all, or with God.
Sure.
Because some of them truly believe that every single moment was God, was Satan, and that's a whole nother topic for another time. But,
sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's complicated, man. It's complicated.
It's complicated. But you don't have to worry about it if you just fear the Lord, which is what Kira's point was.
Thank you, Kira. And Breesy. Very knowledgeable.
And Breesy, yep. I was going to ask you something. Let's change the subject a little bit. When we were talking about the atonement and what Jesus was doing on the cross, we're working our way up to Easter. We've got a couple weeks ago. I've been thinking a lot about this. I want to know how that was presented to you growing up in the Catholic Church.
What, the Easter?
No, Jesus, what he was doing on the cross. Was he was he defeating Satan, or was he taking God's wrath upon you, or upon himself because of your sin?
Wrath, sin. Hardly any mention of Satan. There was. Oh, he defeated the kingdom of darkness, Satan.
Sure.
But it was always back to sin, and it was always back to the wrath of God. It was always that. Do I agree with the whole sin thing? Yeah, absolutely. Now, do I agree necessarily like how you managed to persuade me, right? Not manipulate me, but persuade me with how we perceive the gospel, right? As a means of not necessarily rescuing us from the Creator, but from our own sins. I don't know. I'm wrestling with that, because when you've come to know the gospel in that light of it being the wrath of God daily, when you're younger and stuff, it's hard to see it a different way. It really is.
Okay. But how did that work for you guys? Because I obviously didn't grow up Catholic, so you guys have a crucifix. I'm saying you guys, but the Catholic Church has a crucifix.
Yeah,
and in every sanctuary behind the altar. And so the crucifixion of Christ obviously plays a very important part in Catholic thinking.
Well, it's a huge role, because you go into the church, the first thing you're going to notice, at least this is what I notice, is a humongous cross with Christ on it.
Yeah.
And then as Mass is beginning, you have the priest walking in, and one of them is holding the cross with Jesus on it still. And, they're walking through the aisle, and I think one of them has one of the censers. And they're walking through, and then they place it, and then everybody can sit down and whatnot to hear the message. But there was always this huge emphasis, and I'm not denying it, that is part of the gospel, his death. But it almost felt like we were like, no, I'm not going to say we were. I'm going to say me, just because I don't know anyone else's experience.
Sure.
It felt like I was still like a pagan in a way, in terms of feelings. And what I mean by that is that it felt like I was someone who wasn't acting like he had the good news. Like I was still living in despair, because it was like, oh, he died. Like there is such a huge emphasis on death that there was no life, there was no resurrection. And they did talk about the resurrection, but I felt like they talked about death so much that it overshadowed the resurrection to the point where I started acting like a pagan, in the sense like, why even be a Christian if I'm acting like someone who literally has no hope? I don't know if that makes sense.
So how did they connect the death of Christ to you? So like, what significance did his death have for just the average person? What was the meaning?
Set aside from damnation, I would say it meant not facing the judgment that we deserved.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how did the Eucharist tie into that at your church?
Well, it was always confusing for me because from what I understand, you can only take the Eucharist if you've not committed a specific type of sin. I forget what it's called. They have actually different sin, but if you did, then you wouldn't be able to take the Eucharist, because in the writings of Paul, right, when he talks about it making you feel ill when you just take it out of lack of respect, right?
Sure.
Is the way that I had learned it. And then you also drink of the wine, right, which is supposed to symbolize Jesus' blood. Well, of course, they what's it called? Transubstantiation.
Yeah.
Yeah, where they actually believe that the bread and the wine become the actual body and the blood of Christ. Like, not maybe at that instant, but when you eat it, then it like transforms. Because, and I'm getting this from my uncle too.
Okay.
Because he's way more knowledgeable. So I'm just taking his word from it for it. So that's what he would tell me about the Eucharist. But at the same time, something that was kind of unsettling for me is why must I do this? Set aside from them saying that Jesus said to do this, why must I take of the wine and bread in order to assure that I'm saved? Assured that I'm saved.
Okay. So, I mean,
it's a lot, I know.
Yeah, but it sounds like the connection between Jesus' death on the cross and you was explained to you as your sin is the reason why Christ was crucified, so that God could punish Jesus instead of you.
Yeah.
And then the Eucharist is like a constant reaffirmation of that.
Constant reaffirmation, but it was like, if you don't get it, I had asked my grandfather one time.
Yeah.
He said, well, if you don't do it, you go to hell. Like he genuinely believed that. Not because he wanted to scare me, but that's, he himself, I guess, believed that. So he felt like he had this obligation to do it because Christ had died. It's almost like you still owe a debt.
Okay.
If you think about it.
Yeah.
So if he died for our sins and debt, then why do I still have this feeling of like I'm still owing God something?
Mm-hmm.
And not to go too far off tangent, but especially down here where we live, I think it's embedded in our culture that we just feel bad when somebody, even if it's God himself, that does something so good for us, that we feel like the need that we somehow have to repay that, even if it may not look good or be enough, to God's standards. We're doing it in hopes that maybe we could appease his anger a little bit. Maybe he can be on our side. I'm speaking for myself once again, as someone who is a Catholic. But man, I really felt that way. I really felt like it was almost like I had this great message, but I still had shackles on, which made no sense. Yeah. And this is no disrespect to any Catholics out there.
Well, that's not exclusive to Catholicism, Zach. I grew up in the evangelical church around lots of people who felt like they could just sit down with God and do business. somebody told me once that every time they committed what they thought was a serious sin, they would sing a special song on Sunday in front of everybody as like payment for their sin. And that was somebody who had no Catholic background at all. So there is a need within us to feel like we make up somehow for the mistakes that we make with some sort of ritual, which gets back into like the reason for the whole sacrifice thing in the first place, right?
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned it in the last time we spoke on here, and you said, what other thing but the blood of Christ can really even be as valuable than a hymn or going to take the Eucharist?
Carmen says that I grew up Catholic, but I didn't pay attention. I wasn't interested in religion, as I called it, when I was little. So Zach's sitting there in church sweating it out, trying to figure out how all this works. Carmen's there just going, I don't get it. That's hilarious.
I felt like that as a kid.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I felt like that. It wasn't until when I was in high school and stuff that I started to take it a little bit more seriously. But when I was a kid,
I was trying to crack the code from when I was like born.
Oh, for real?
Yeah. My parents always say that when I was like 4 years old, I asked my dad if Satan repented, if God would forgive him.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, I don't know.
We don't talk about that.
Takes all types, right? She also says there's always a crucifix at our churches with a cross on it, or with Jesus on it. Yeah, that's true. She says Franciscan theology in the Catholic Church. Whoa, that's another story. It's awesome. It was being discussed here last week. Yeah, right on. The Franciscans definitely have, some Franciscans definitely have unique ways of approaching the sacrifice of Christ and the whole guilt complex that we develop. But again, I think that there's like a baseline human tendency to feel inadequate, and we bring that tendency to everything that we do. And when we bring it to our religion, then we're always afraid of God in an immature way, and we're always trying to make up for the things that we've done so that God won't be too mad at us. And we see Jesus as God's kind of cosmic punching bag so that he can take his anger out on Jesus instead of on us. But I don't think that that's the fear of the Lord that we're talking about that really leads to intimacy and to love and to wisdom. And that's not to knock the icons or the rituals, you know, just because our church, just because our churches in the evangelical world just look like multi-purpose buildings and have no form that's at all artistically pleasing, doesn't mean that we have to criticize other groups for decorating with a little bit more flair, right? That's not what it comes down to.
Yeah, there's always going to be those kind of arguments, what color the carpet is and whatnot. Should we have mosaic windows depicting the saints or of Christ, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Saint John of, was it Damascus? Was it Damascus? He was one of the saints who defended that of using icons, and he was actually he was like at Maximus's level.
Yep.
When it came to knowledge, and he would actually debate a lot of the Muslims, because Islam was huge at that time, and you know, he argued for the Trinity or whatnot, and that's different. But yeah, like, I mean,
yeah, there's been an icon no icon debate in the church going back a very long way.
And, personally, I don't think I'm huge on that. You know, in the past I was. Now I'm not really huge on it, but I don't know. I think it's one of those areas where it's like, is that something that we should really, I don't know, pound people over the head for as much as maybe someone who slept with someone else's wife? You see what I'm saying?
Should we pound them over the head too?
No. No.
No, I think it's funny that in our time, you know, in churches like ours, you can't have a crucifix with Jesus on it in the sanctuary because that's Catholic, that's idolatry. But we've got all these goofy cartoon pictures of Jesus that we use in our children's ministries. You know what I mean? So we're inconsistent always. That's one of the things about Christianity that makes other people crazy about us is we make really declarative rules and then we break them immediately. Christianity has done that from the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can't really say anything because I have a cross that my father gave me. It's, I guess you could call it a Catholic cross. I don't know. I don't think it's a Catholic cross. I just think it's a cross with, I guess, a little figure of Jesus. But I can't really say, oh, you know, I'm against this when I'm wearing a cross with him.
Yeah.
I don't know, but you know, you get me, right? You get what I was trying to go with. What I'm saying is, like, why make a big deal over things that shouldn't really be made a big deal when we should be talking to people about, hey, maybe it's not a good idea to like kill somebody, kind of thing.
Let's Bible this.
Oh.
So Colossians chapter 2, right? Therefore, this is verse 16. Do not let anyone condemn you in matters of food and drink or of observing festivals, new moons, or Sabbaths. These are only the shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Do not let anyone disqualify you, insisting on self-abasement and worship of angels, dwelling on visions, puffed up without cause by a human way of thinking, and not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and held together by its ligaments and sinews, grows with a growth that is from God. If with Christ you have died to the elemental spirits of the universe, why do you live as if you still belong to the world? Why do you submit to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. All these regulations refer to things that perish with use. They are simply human commands and teachings. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-imposed piety, humility, and severe treatment of the body, but they are of no value in checking self-indulgence.
What was that part about angels? Because I definitely don't agree with the whole worshiping of angels.
I'm glad you're on the record saying that. Never come up in any conversation I've ever had with anyone.
Oh, no, it's with the...
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
okay. But I guess the point is, the vision that the early church had for what our community could be is not a bunch of people running around sweating each other over the minor details. Right? So if you've got a cross on your chain around your neck, how does that compare with dying with Christ to the elemental spirits of the universe? It doesn't compare. So lighten up, right?
What do you mean elemental spirits of the universe?
Man, you want me to exegete this passage, but we don't have time. I mean, we really don't have time to go into that.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Ray's here. She's the one who asked the question about the fear of God. Ray, if you go back to the beginning, I answered your question super directly with some quotes from St. Maximus before Zach got here. Carmen says she's on her third Richard Rohr book, which is great. Carmen says you look super cool like Bob Dylan.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Are you a big Bob Dylan fan?
I'm sorry, I don't know who that is. I probably do, but I don't know.
Again, we don't have time
Sorry
to go
guys,
into Bob Dylan either.
I probably committed a grave sin. I'm sorry.
The answer is blowing in the wind, my friend. The answer is blowing in the wind. Carmen says that Catholics believe the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed. Oh, she said she figured you wouldn't know that you look like Bob Dylan, but it's a compliment.
Oh, thank you. And as far as the Apostles' Creed, right? The Nicene Creed, I think that's pretty solid, no? Like it's pretty like.
Do you remember it?
Pretty based. No, I don't. Sadly.
I believe in one God.
I just remember the true God from true God, light from light part.
Yeah. Okay, while we're here, let's read the Apostles' Creed.
Got him.
One's dying.
You said Ray's there, right? Hello, Ray.
He asked if our live streams are on a regular schedule. That's kind of funny. It's every Wednesday at 5, except when it's at 5:30, or except when we need to skip a Wednesday.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry about that.
I'm also sorry I came late. That was not planned, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we try to be here around 5 Central Time on Wednesdays, but stuff happens. Yeah. Kira says, I love it. I've never met someone who didn't know who Bob Dylan was.
Oh my goodness.
You got some music to listen to.
I think you do too.
Why?
Well, you still haven't listened to Enya.
I've listened to enough Enya to get it. And how dare you put Enya in the same category as Bob Dylan?
How dare you not put Enya in the same category as Bob Dylan?
We're not doing that.
We're not. No.
Oh, Belen says, ha ha ha, love you, Zach.
Love you too, Valenci.
All right, I think we're kind of winding down here. You say that the Apostles' Creed is pretty solid.
I think so.
Yeah, you can get behind it.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll go through that sometime point by point. That'd be a fun stream, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Lord's Prayer, right? Dissect it.
Yeah. Yep. There was something else we were going to talk about last week or last time we did this and we didn't have time.
About hell?
Oh yeah, we got to do a whole hell one.
Yeah, because honestly, that's what I thought we were going to go into. So I was like prepared for like, deep convo on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess by talking about the fear of God and its appropriate place, I think we're kind of opening the way to the discussion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could say we're opening the gates of hell.
I'm not doing that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Bad joke.
Unless it's to escape.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to cut it off there. Thank you guys for coming today and for watching with us. Thank you, Ray, for your awesome question. And thank you, Kira and Breesy and Carmen and everyone who participated and for sharing your perspectives. And we love y'all. We'll see you next time.
Till Christ is formed in us. Oh, yeah. That was right? Till Christ is formed in us?
I mean, that's our catchphrase, but I also believe it. We're going to keep doing this till Christ is formed in us, right?
Well, there you go. You heard it from Mr. Adams himself.
All right, guys. We'll see you later.